Hello, everyone. Thank you for logging on with us today. We're just going to wait another minute to allow for more folks to sign on. Thanks.
Hi, this is Boz. Can you guys hear me?
Hi, Boz. I can hear you.
Okay, good. Just stepped out here from one of the presentations. Oh, we're live. Okay.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the TBR Webinar series. Today, Practice Manager Patrick Heffernan, Senior Analyst Boz Hrizstov, Senior Analyst Elitsa Bakalova, and Analyst Lesiczka will be discussing Consulting's Robot Army, how RPA changes the consulting business model. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping notes. At the bottom of your screen, you can access the slides, audio controls, Q&A, speaker bios, and our survey. After the webinar, you will receive an email with a replay link, as well as a link to view and register for other TBR webinars. If you have any questions for us, please submit them via the Q&A widget in On24. You may also reach out to us after the event at webinars@tbri.com. Thank you again for joining us, and here's Patrick to begin the webinar.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And so I'd encourage everybody to send your questions in while we're talking. We're probably only going to be coming at you with the slides and our analysis for about 30 minutes, so there'll be plenty of time at the end for Q&A. But please send it in as we're talking. And I want to start off, before we even get to sort of the table of contents and what we're going to talk about today, I just want to put everything in context, in perspective. And while this webinar is going to touch on IT services and consulting and an awful lot about automation and RPA and intelligent automation, I do want to make sure that it's clear we are coming at this from the services angle, from the consulting angle, looking at the business models and how those are changing. And so this slide, which we actually used for our predictions webinar back in December, really helps you understand how we see the world, how we see the consulting space, how we see the IT services space, and how we see emerging technologies and what is digital transformation, how all of that is having an impact on the business models on these companies themselves. If you're familiar with TBR, you know that we begin our analysis by looking at individual vendors, individual companies, trying to understand their strategies and their performances, and then we build up our bigger understanding of the market and what's happening across the ecosystem through partners and through clients, through our understanding of individual companies. So when we do a webinar like this, and when we look at a topic like as broad a topic as automation, and as technical or technology-driven a topic as automation, we do want to make sure we come at it from the perspective of what's happening with the IT services and the consulting vendors. So what are we going to talk about today? Exactly that. We're going to look at the consultants and the IT services vendors and what's happening to their business models. We're going to talk about the way that clients, customers of these vendors, and customers specifically of robotic process automation and intelligent automation are looking at automation, understanding it, and what they're asking for. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the more prominent RPA vendors, really, again, from the perspective of how their interactions with the consultancies and the IT services players are affecting each other, both changing them, the technology vendors themselves, and then changing the IT services and the consulting vendors. So with that, this first slide comes directly from some research that we published last year, And it looks at the real spectrum of adoption. Well, first, the spectrum of automation from RPA through intelligent automation and to artificial intelligence. And you can see there's a real spectrum here in terms of the adoption and how that spectrum really creates kind of a fluid set of opportunities for IT services vendors and consultancies. And with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Boz, who's joining us from Las Vegas. So hopefully his sound is good for everybody. And he's going to walk us through what he sees in this space. Boz?
Yes, thank you, Patrick, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. As Patrick mentioned, actually, I'm at a summit for a services vendor that is very much focused on RPA and actually trying to look into their BPO operations, how they're transforming, how they're using chat and chatbots and RPA-based tools to become more of a digital services-oriented company and kind of transition from the legacy operations that they've done for the last almost 2 decades. As Patrick mentioned, the slide here kind of helps us to understand and position our thinking around the spectrum of automation, the way we see it today, the way we think our, the vendors that we track within the service industries are placing their best, essentially. So the 3 major stages of the automation, the way we see it, is the RPA, which is kind of really the low-level tasks, kind of a consolidated engines that vendors are after. A lot of the RPA vendors that are being used, like UiPath, Blue Prism, Automation Anywhere, and so forth, are the ones that are building tools that services vendor partner with, which we'll touch upon a little bit later in the deck today. Then the next phase is what we call intelligent automation, or he said kind of the more, get a little more sophisticated from technology point of view, but it's also helping vendors to optimize and industrialize higher value services, especially in the L2, L3 support, which could essentially help vendors drive a little better margin performance if their clients had to adopt at scale. Then last but not least, the cognitive or the artificial intelligence engines. I think that's kind of the end goal for automation for all vendors in the space, is where they can leverage tools and engines that are really adaptive in their nature, and they can actually recommend a lot of the solutions that services vendors can do. From as a common, kind of as we look at that spectrum as the way we think about the services vendors, we have outlined several examples from IT services vendors have they launched or in collaboration with technology partners different tools. And as we have pointed on the slide, it's the pace of adoption across those 3 stages varies. Obviously, the RPA market is kind of ripe for growth. Intelligent automation is kind of like where we see it. It's about 3 years from kind of where the RPA is, and the last, the cognitive engines is really about that, the long-term kind of the goal. But I think what we kind of have to keep in mind is, as much as technology and automation sounds very sophisticated, I think the common denominator across all these stages, across all these engines, it's all software, and all software rules apply to all these pieces, all these tools that vendors use for different elements of the service delivery. I think it's an important piece to think about it, because 9 out of 10 times, folks, both vendors as well as buyers, kind of get into the whole hope and around what can automation do for me as an organization. What is this whole fear about automation? How much it's going to replace jobs and whatnot? But I think we're reaching a stage where both vendors and buyers are realizing that automation is not going to be replacing jobs per se and taking over jobs, but more augmenting jobs. And I think that's a key piece that from 3 years ago, that the initial hype cycle has kind of come down, and a lot of the vendors that are thinking about using and leveraging automation in both service delivery as well as managing their own internal operations are coming to a point where, okay, now we understand that the hype is gone. Let's try to be a little bit more tangible. A lot of the tangible results and outcomes are being driven by RPA tools, at least today. But I think long term, I think it's, as vendors think optimizing their performance, the intelligent automation and AI-based tools will be the one that essentially bringing the ultimate result. So that's kind of like the stage of the market from a RPA, automation, intelligent automation, the way we see it, the way we think it. As I mentioned, we have several examples across those categories he outlined. As Patrick mentioned, not so much of a deep into the technology, but how it has impact on the business performance as those vendors leverage those tools either through as a service model or platform-based services or as a license. That's kind of like the three ways of monetizing using those tools. And with that, I'll go over to the next slide as we think about the performance.
Hold on, Boz. I want to point out one thing that I think is really important on the slide. Right in the middle of the slide, we make the point that vendors need to take a change management first, technology second approach. And I think this is something that when we talk about automation, when we talk about RPA, we are saying that there's going to be a change in the business model. At Boz, as you said, it's all software, and so all the software rules apply. Customization, subscription, license, all the changes to the business model. But at the end of the day, a lot of the consultancies are consultancies first and will continue to bring change management as an element here that is an important piece of what others, particularly the RPA vendors themselves, are really not, either shouldn't be doing or not willing to do. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. It's in the middle of the slide and sort of the middle of that spectrum, but it's an important piece of this puzzle. So with that, we will go now to this slide. And Boz, you can take it from here.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a good point, Patrick. Thanks for bringing us forward, with folks on the line. But I think it's the element that we start talking about is about where are the vendors today, and in terms of like how much automation is helping them. And on that slide, we kind of start looking into thinking what are the variables that are impacting vendors' performance. How are actually vendor performing in this world of automation? Is automation at scale? What's going on and where things are? So we start looking at that common denominator of RPA-based tools and some of the functionalities that those offer, and how RPA can actually play a role into the world of automation and long term, essentially. As we have plotted kind of the margin performance versus attrition, and kind of looking at like what's going on in the market, is one of the variables that we have. And by the way, this is the graph that comes directly from our global delivery benchmark, which kind of tracks 14 of the kind of leading IT services vendors that have invested heavily in both global delivery models, but in automation as well. And looking at how attrition is actually starting crippling up, and it's kind of going up and up and up. At the same time, margin is coming down. So we're asking ourselves the question: how much attrition correlates to margin, and vice versa? And what are some of the ways to address, vendors to address that gap, and kind of how far this gap will widen and how soon before it starts to close that gap. So kind of questions that we it's not a one-size-fits-all thinking around that, hey, if you think about attrition, you have to think automation that can help, etc. But one way to think about it is that RPA is not just delivering services, but also adopting internally, is a way for a lot of the companies to kind of look at themselves and become the customer zero of their automation message, essentially, and really start thinking about workplace and workforce optimization of how kind of easing that and elevating, some of the pains and the concerns of what automation can do before they can start preaching out to the client. So we think that, with if and how some of the vendors that have been using automation more heavily, a little bit better performing, in terms of attrition and stabilizing attrition, and kind of correlating to better overall financial performance, including margins. No, it's not a very clean cut, but it's something to think about, especially as better macroeconomic conditions and so forth. It's enabling a lot of talent to jump over different competitors and kind of putting some more pressure on the vendors to to pay higher wages and so forth. So that's kind of putting some more pressure on the bottom line. So if as an employer you think about and how you entice your employees, I mean, one way to think about it is to show innovation internally, not as much internally as much as you go outside to the market and to your own clients. So it's important to think about what RPA can do in the long term, as the long-term goal is artificial intelligence and cognitive-based engines that can predict and help a lot more to actually augment the work that a lot of the vendors are doing today. So it's a plot of leading vendors and looking at their attrition and their margins. Margin is still pressured, and I think it's going to remain pressured in the next at least couple of years before vendors start to learn how to package those solutions, how to actually think about monetizing the investments they've done in both skill set as well as technology. Patrick, did you have something else to add on the slide?
I do, because I think this is an important.
I actually have something, Boz.
Yeah, go ahead, Elitsa.
When you look at it from an IT services standpoint broadly, automation is one lever of the equation from a profitability standpoint. And I think, as vendors are broadening their automation initiatives, it's very important to know that it's not the only lever to improve profitability. And, I've seen multiple cases where vendors are looking to integrate automation with other factors. And, those factors work jointly together to drive that profitability change. And I think it's important to note that you have to make sure that automation is also part of the mix. And by the factors, I mean optimizing the delivery overall, consolidating facilities or consolidating data centers, for example, improving equipment in the data center to have better storage capacity, to have higher speed, to be energy efficient, industrialization of the service delivery to follow a factory-based approach, for example. Using low-cost resources is still a very big part of the equation for the IT services vendors that we track on a quarterly basis. The other part is looking at the SG&A function, so making sure that the sales part is efficient. Utilizing tools to enable sales and to have less expenses tied to sales, especially when it comes to now digital transformation projects being smaller in scale and vendors having to pursue more smaller scale engagements, so driving sales costs up. So looking at the sales function is also important. And then the last piece, the general and administrative costs. Multiple vendors have been saying that it's really a focus to make sure that G&A is consolidated. There's less expenses that are tied to people that are, have administrative tasks, costs related to real estate, et cetera. So it's a whole ecosystem of factors that I think are important for vendors, and the ones that do succeed in terms of improving profitability know how to manage all those factors.
And thanks, Elitsa. I think it's important to have that context too, because when we're, again, to get back to what we talked about at the beginning, when we're looking at something like automation, we're looking at RPA, within the context of the IT services vendors and the consultancies, it's important to understand it's only one piece of what's happening, and one piece of where the pressures are on the business model. And Elitsa actually leads our research around IT services broadly, and she produces the IT services benchmark every quarter. So for her, it's an important way to put RPA and automation into context of what's going on across all these vendors. So speaking of vendors specifically, let's turn now to at least three. And again, in the Q&A, you're welcome to ask about others specifically that we cover. But these are three that kind of stand out for us and what's happening in the RPA and the automation space specifically. So I'll let Boz tackle Accenture and KPMG, and then I'll give some thoughts on McKinsey. Boz?
Yes, thank you, Patrick. So yeah, I mean, Accenture, just kind of start with them. It's interesting just to kind of orient the folks on the line. And when we talk about technology consulting as part of the management consulting revenue, we say 10%, that sounds kind of not right in a sense. But for us, it's about definitions of how we look at their technology consulting business versus IT consulting, which is for us, IT consulting is much larger portion of their business. That's kind of like more into the systems integration portion. Technology consulting in that sense here is that, consulting on kind of like the idea that technology can help you with your business, problems versus consulting on specific technology, which is IT consulting. Just a kind of quick orientation here so folks on the line understand when we say 10% of the management consulting, what it means. But I think the more important thing here to highlight for Accenture is that as an organization, and I just came back from Accenture Technology Symposium last week that, we're publishing event perspective shortly on that, going to give some more highlights. The company as a whole has certainly kind of pivoted towards a little bit more of that innovation and start thinking about how platforms and how technology can enable them to deliver what they do. I think that they have reached a point as a company that have built a brand with a trust, with a key buyer, which is the IT, that still manages a lot of those decisions that where Accenture plays really strongly. And in the many with conversations with clients previously it's about that innovative thinking. It's about how can Accenture can help them. And it's also diminishing the risk of their solutions. And looking at it from a horizontal perspective and using a lot of the technology capabilities that they have built both organically and inorganically, it helps them drive those conversations about what's next and kind of expanding mind share and wallet share with a lot of the existing client base. I mean, some of the solutions that they've invested, like intelligent automation platform, my wizard platform, those are kind of solutions that really kind of provide a strong backbone. A lot of those consulting conversations as an element of like where the company can further guide them through, not just from the business discussions, the strategy discussions, but really getting into more of an industry-specific element. And we have highlighted here a couple of points here around healthcare-specific offerings, from a management consulting perspective. There's so many more that, industry apps, like several, dozens of industry apps that actually Accenture develops on their own, as well as with their key strategic partners as they go to market. And it's an important way of think about, how the company is positioning itself as they go through, both internally, and which have adopted a lot of those technologies internally, speaking about our customer zero previously, how they actually go to market and help their own clients to kind of navigate a lot of those operational challenges and technology challenges. A lot of vendors, a lot of the buyers that start like taking and embarking on digital transformation initiatives, like different specific processes in the front end, middle office, back office, depending on where they are in their maturity state. And so it's kind of like the horizontal capabilities have come up in the ranks significantly, especially within Accenture technology that's supporting a lot of the management consulting revenue that Accenture is driving broadly as an organization. And then pivoting over to KPMG, kind of a wild card in a sense of among the big four. We know well how Deloitte has been really performing well and strongly keeping up with their consulting practice, expanding into systems integration space, expanding into the outsourcing space. PwC and EY quickly catching up, investing a lot of the RPA tools through their partnerships with Blue Prism and UiPath. KPMG as well. KPMG, however, has really doubled down a lot on using automation as well internally for a lot of their processes, but also a big focus for them externally has been around cybersecurity and really using some of their assurance and governance and risk and compliance capabilities from a consulting point of view to help them, drive some of the technology consulting element and really getting into the automating, processes, tools. I mean, done quite a bit of automation in the audit practice that kind of leverage some of those experiences they think about getting to market with advisory and getting into, to market with tax and so forth. So it's a big shift among a lot of the vendors, but, KPMG is certainly a company that somewhat has been quiet and partnering with maybe tier 2 services providers and whatnot, or maybe a mid-tier, I should say, not tier 2, but mid-tier services providers to go to market and kind of drive that, opportunities around RPA implementation and kind of services that can actually expand wallet share with the existing client base. Patrick, I'll turn it over to you from McKinsey.
Thanks, and glad you brought up security as part of something that KPMG is focused on. We actually, as part of our entire digital transformation insights portfolio, have been sort of folding in how security is one of those security services or one of those fundamental sort of underlying services that have to be provided as part of anything digital, and so it becomes a piece of every single engagement, and so it's important for us to understand where it fits in and where a lot of the different vendors, the KPMG is a good example, Capgemini, EY, PwC, all the rest, so Accenture, of course, as well. But to talk about McKinsey for a minute, you can see here just 10% of their management consulting revenues are coming out of technology consulting. That may seem like a surprisingly low number until you think about McKinsey and what they're known for and strategy and operations consulting in particular, but there's actually been more growth in that technology consulting portfolio for them than any of their other portfolios over the last few years. And it really shows that there's a growing tension within McKinsey about whether or not to be more of a technology-centric company, more of a technology-centric consultancy, and even get to the point of engaging in full-on implementation or of IT solutions, or to stay more agnostic and more limited. And it's a good example of a tension that is across all of consulting, really, not just McKinsey, but BCG, Bain, and the rest of the more strategy-centric consultancies. And that is really getting into how you balance talent and careers, who you hire actually to deliver these kind of services, what your leadership within the firm is and how capable they are of leading a different kind of workforce and structuring a career path for consultants who are not what you typically had before. And then, of course, the most important thing is maybe the shift that we talked about at the beginning from slides to code, where the clients are expecting that the consultants, even a McKinsey, comes in with emerging technology in hand, with the capabilities to deliver RPA, to deliver on blockchain, to deliver on all the different solutions, the emerging technologies that are out there. And so we have seen McKinsey in the last couple of years make some acquisitions and create some spaces, physical spaces, for their clients that have been a lot more technology-centric, and that has fed into this technology growth, technology consulting growth that we've seen in them in the last couple of years. But we think they've reached a point now, and you can read this in our assessment of them that we published in December. We think they've reached a point now where they're done with the acquisitions. They're probably done with some of the more aggressive hiring, and it's going to be a matter of rolling out solutions and taking some of the use cases that they're building with their clients and finding ways to replicate those with other clients, including in areas like RPA and artificial intelligence. But the real challenge then for a firm like McKinsey is sort of what's the future. If automation is going to depend on all different elements, including RPA, blockchain, AI, even IoT and cloud, and it's going to be challenged by rates of adoption, challenged by regulations, then, and we have on here trade-based money laundering as an area that McKinsey will get into. Well, what is exactly McKinsey's role going to be? Are they going to play a substantial role in the future of automation that is so heavily dependent upon not just that change management, not just that strategy consulting that they excel at, but the actual capability to deliver, to implement, to bring those solutions to the market, and to change their own business model to account for what we talked about at the very beginning of this presentation, where we talked about the software being the software rules applying, that all of this is at the end of the day software, and how these firms adapt to becoming software companies in a way, or in their own space. And with that sort of raises then the larger questions about what clients actually want. And when we talk to consultancies and IT services vendors, and we talk about their engagements around RPA and automation more broadly, they tell us again and again that clients want everything faster and cheaper and at a lower risk. But clients are swimming in a data swamp, or wading through a data swamp. And there's been years of trying to cleanse data, but it's not something that's easily done. Integration of IoT and blockchain and AI and RPA solutions is not easily done, particularly when your data is a mess. And so that leads to an opportunity here, a great question that has come up again and again, and that's whether or not you take a bad process and simply throw some robots at it and automate it without any remediation, without optimization, and in a sense getting those cost savings right away, or do you fix the process as traditionally has been done? Consultancies have done well over the years by going in and identifying where a process is broken and helping an organization fix that process, streamline it, optimize it, gain the most efficiencies, and move on. That's great. That's always been the longer-term solution. But with robotic process automation, there is the opportunity to automate even a bad process and immediately gain some advantages. And you can see I've listed on those bullets there some of the things that the clients themselves are able to get out of taking this approach, investing those cost savings into higher priority items, investing in fixing the process if you really think it's essential, and then honestly demonstrating a quick return on the investment as a way to say, we took on this project and here's how quickly we can show the results. And then and the more rapidly trained staff and get staff comfortable with automation. This gets back to what Boz was talking about around robots replacing jobs and this idea that software is going to eat us all out of our livelihood. If you're able to train staff more quickly on what the opportunities are with RPA and show how it's an enhancement, not a job destroyer, then you're obviously going to be able to put more effort and more money into it. So that, as you could probably tell, I lean very heavily towards the left side of this argument, to the automate right away. But there are advantages, of course, to fixing the process first. And I think this discussion is sort of remains an ongoing sort of debate within the consulting and the IT services realm of whether or not if you just automate a bad process, you are just taking garbage in and putting garbage out, whether or not you're compromising your own process and you're compromising your own data, and you're in the long run compromising your ability to get the most out of your data and get the most out of your processes if you're just simply automating what's there. And you can see then to the right, we have RPA is only 22% of the technology that's considered central to digital transformation initiatives. This comes out of our research last fall. We expect to see this grow. We expect to see, to get back to, again, to what we talked about earlier with adoption and that spectrum from RPA to intelligent automation to artificial intelligence. We expect this is going to grow as clients become more comfortable with RPA, as the vendors themselves become, as Boz mentioned, sort of client zero, as that turns into use cases that can be rolled out more rapidly and more specifically to clients where it can be applied. I think we'll see RPA move up on this chart. To be honest, I was surprised when these results came back that it was as low as it was, but it is something we'll certainly keep an eye on as we continue to do this research. So with that, let's turn to some of the vendors, the technology vendors that are out there. And you can see on the left, we've listed a few of the ones, the more prominent RPA vendors, and on the right, some of the more prominent consultancies and IT services vendors that we follow. And yes, I actually do mean yesterday that PwC announced a new deal with Blue Prism. Again, this is what we see as the opportunity here for these vendors to be sort of making a bet on which one of these, we see here the consultancies. When I'm talking about the vendors, I want to make sure it's clear. We see the consultancies and the IT services vendors clearly making bets on which one of the different RPA vendors they believe are going to be around for the long term, that they believe are going to survive. And Boz, let me turn to you for a minute just for some thoughts on, because I know you've spent time with some of these companies, some thoughts on where you think some of them are headed. Boz?
Yes, thank you, Patrick. So, I mean, it's an evolving market, as we've been talking about, but I think it's a market for especially the RPA vendors. I think themselves, some of them are recognizing the opportunity where RPA leads to, but it cannot be just about RPA. RPA can become one of those ubiquitous technologies within the next couple of years that if you only bet your existence on RPA, I think you're set for failure. So I think some of those vendors need to start thinking a little bit more progressively when it comes to investing in optimizing their own platforms that they have made some money already and have drawn some attention from the investment community, and also driving some investment from and partnerships from the bigger consultancies and the systems integration services vendors. Because SIs on the other side, they can use those partnerships today to learn and actually develop their own capabilities around automation. And as for consultancies, if they certainly have certain margin band that they're after. So we talked about it, we saw it earlier that the margin is not there yet, and just using RPA as a good starting point, that's not going to help them with driving higher margin, engagement from a managed services perspective. It's the AI and the intelligent automation, that long tail opportunities where we see that those adaptive agents really helping the consultancies trying to actually make and kind of get that return on investment. So for the RPA vendors today, I think that the key element will be to really understand the value proposition that they bring to their side partners and also to the market. And if it's just about RPA today, we don't see that being a sustainable strategy, beyond the next after the 2-3 years mark, where I think as automation gets to scale and more buyers get a little bit more comfortable with using it, to be able to make it. So it's kind of that's an interesting dynamic, that for those vendors to as they kind of like 3-year-old startups, but 3-year going on 30 in the sense of how fast they try to evolve. So they have to, getting in a little bit faster in their long-term strategy.
And Elitsa, So I think we're going to jump now and get specific on UiPath and talk a little bit about what we've seen from them. And Elitsa, if you want to go first with UiPath and Capgemini, and then Boz, maybe some thoughts from you, and then and I do want to make sure that everyone knows Boz put out a fantastic special report back in October of this year, of last year, that talked about UiPath's event down in Miami. So if you haven't read it, please do go find it and read it. And I'll talk a little bit about the highlights from that. But first, let's go to Elitsa and UiPath and Capgemini. Elitsa?
Thank you, Patrick. Yes, so Capgemini was listed as a UiPath partner in the previous slide. So here are some details around the partnership. The relationship dates since 2015, and both companies they jointly work in the business services area. So effectively, some call it BPO, but they cover several areas in the BPO segment, such as finance and accounting, HR services, and supply chain management. So the idea is to and they've actually launched a solution called Capgemini UiPath RPA solution that when implemented for clients, it reduces their operational costs, it improves efficiency, it also boosts productivity, and very important, that's something that we talked about, is creates job satisfaction. So there are several aspects that and areas that have seen improvement for clients. And this solution is typically implemented for Capgemini clients. And the key for Capgemini is that it contributes consulting and systems integration services. So, there are several areas where Capgemini uses its expertise to complement the UiPath software solution. So it's a very clear example of how an IT services vendor uses consulting and systems integration, and a UiPath contributes with their RPA solution to drive, the goals for clients and solve a business case.
Excellent. Boz, some thoughts on UiPath broadly?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think as Elitsa pointed out, the partnership between Capgemini and UiPath is a good example of UiPath's approach. And not just one example of those RPA vendors. I think from our experience at least, what we see UiPath really pushing forward is the way they partner. And, we know that a lot of technology vendors are trying to develop services arms. And many times the salespeople within the RPA vendors maybe kind of going head-to-head with actually the services folks, consultants, and kind of creates that kind of confusion from the client side. UiPath is actually trying to kind of stay in the backseat in the sense of like when they go to market with a specific partner and they go to market with their, SI partners, they're really there to support when it comes to the technology element, not so much to interfere with the sales of the SI, and kind of especially the SI brings, the technology to the client. So really in a supportive, not so much of a competitive way. So I think UiPath has the kind of a vision around where those relationships have evolved and how they actually think about, if and when, not if, but when RPA kind of technologies become ubiquitous, what is for them. So they have to think about the broader, bigger picture and the implications that that market is going to be facing. And we have to be true to, to what the software market. Those consolidations occur every so often. We see a major consolidation right now going into the mid-tier vendors and the digital services, digital native services vendors like DXC acquiring Luxoft, Atos buying Syntel. We know there's a number of mid-tier vendors out there, India-based or even US-based, that actually are ripe for acquisition. So those cycles go through, and RPA as a market, as vendors that are leading right now, I think they to avoid that consolidation and getting into more of a long-term opportunities, they have to increase their stickiness with their partners. And I think the alliance partner approach in the go-to-market that UiPath has deployed, I think it makes sense. It's something that's going to help them to drive more of a long-term view. They could get acquired from some of those SI vendors, but they can actually think in a smart way of how they actually drive, a long-term opportunities for themselves, as an independent company as well.
Yeah, it's really helpful, Boz. And I think, the two things that jump out at me thinking about UiPath and sort of lessons for other RPA vendors in this space and working with the consultancies and with the IT services vendors that we cover and talk to all the time. Staying in your own swim lane, doing what you do well, doing only what you do well as a general business model, that's something we tend to look very fondly on because that strategy correlates very well with the best performance we see. So a company like UiPath that understands what they do well and does only that, I think is important. And the other thing is in this particular case for RPA, I think, as you mentioned, sort of good partners do make good clients. They create good use cases. And I think the ability of an RPA vendor to ensure that their own SI and consultancy partners are clients as well, I think is sort of it's essential. If that's not part of the strategy, then it's probably not in a long term going to be one of the RPA vendors that's still standing. So with that, I want to make sure everyone sees this is the wide range of coverage that we do on management consulting specifically. Management consulting is one of the areas within the IT services that we cover here at TBR. It's probably, this particular piece of research is probably the most dense, but it's also a bit limited because we're only looking at the top management consultancies across the world. As opposed to IT services, we do a benchmark there that's quarterly and looks at a wider range of companies. We also have, as I mentioned, a digital transformation insights portfolio that's rolling out a product every month. We'll actually be publishing on IoT and the business of IoT tomorrow. So not so much the technology side of IoT, but how consultancies and IT services vendors are working with IoT vendors to create the right kind of business, create the kind of business that is actually going to grow for them faster than the rest of the market. So that'll be publishing tomorrow. And we also cover the public sector, and we cover healthcare IT services as well. Boz mentioned global delivery. Actually, two of the slides out of here, this presentation came from his global delivery benchmark, which also publishes semi-annually and includes a look at how automation is playing in the way that IT services vendors deploy their headcount or build their headcount and then deploy it where they put their people and how they see headcount growth as part of the long-term strategy for all these vendors. So that's sort of the big picture on everything we cover. I'll also throw out there that over the next 6 weeks, we will be meeting with PwC, Atos, EY, and Accenture, and probably some others as well. Boz mentioned he's at an event right now at TELUS. So we're out there on the road. If you have questions, if you want to know what kinds of things we're seeing and hearing and thinking about before our next webinar, you're certainly welcome to reach out to us directly and ask us questions. Again, this is the full coverage of what we have. And again, here is the team that's been on today. So with that, we don't have any lingering questions out there, and so we're a little bit over time, as long as we wanted to stay talking at you. But if you do have any questions, send them to us directly. And otherwise, thank you very much for joining today's webinar. Thanks, Elitsa, and thanks, Boz. Safe travels.
Thank you.